Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
Hey, welcome everyone to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. Now, if you're a big game hunter and want to get the full lay of the land this hunting season, then this is going to be a deep dive you're going to want to put an ear to. Now, I know what you're thinking. We're already halfway into archery season. Why do I want to know all this stuff now? Don't you fret. A lot of the information on today's episode is meant to serve you well throughout the fall. So whether you're up in the high country bugling for elk or hitting the timber cuts for whitetails later in the season, keep this info in your back pocket. All right, with that, let's dive into it. Statewide deer and elk hunting in Idaho is trending upward after a tough season in 2023. Elk, the stalwarts of the mountains, generally speaking, have stayed relatively healthy and stable. Statewide, mule deer numbers also appear to be improving, while eastern Idaho's muleys, after suffering one of the worst winters on record in 2023, are starting to gradually grow thanks to a much-needed mild winter. While scorching summer temperatures usually present the threat of episodic hemorrhagic disease, or EHD, in white-tailed deer, so far there's no sign of any significant outbreaks this year. If we're going to lead with good news, then we probably ought to start with elk. Overall, the numbers of Idaho elk are once again looking steady and impressive. Fish and Game's deer and elk coordinator Toby Bedreau believes we will see much of the same, if not better, conditions for elk this fall. Here's Toby.
Overall, elk populations are looking good. We saw 87% of collared elk calves and 96% of collared cows make it through the winter, which is a few percentage points higher than most years.
Mule deer also appear to be heading in the right direction, including those in eastern Idaho. Winter survival is typically the driving factor for mule deer herds, and the long-term average is about 60% of fawns surviving their first winter. But during hard winters, that number can be significantly lower. To monitor herds, Fish and Game biologists in early winter captured and collared 217 mule deer fawns and 168 does in various parts of the state to track their winter survival. Of those collared, 77% of fawns and 95% of does made it through to spring.
It's going to take a couple more years for mule deer to rebound in that part of the state, but a few more mild winters, and I think fawns in particular will continue to trend in the right direction.
And as for whitetails, which saw the only hunter harvest increase among the three species, the news appears good, at least for now. Hot summers and white-tailed deer can sometimes turn into a storm cloud of potential EHD outbreaks, seen as recently as 2021. There have been no reports so far, but Fish and Game wildlife officials are encouraging folks to keep an eye out for deer showing signs of the disease. EHD outbreaks usually occur during later summer and before the first frost, when hot, dry conditions cause animals to congregate at watering areas where the gnats, which carry and transmit the disease, are also likely to be found. Assuming we avoid an outbreak, whitetail herds should continue to rebound. Let's take a look at last year's harvest. In 2023, hunters harvested 18,568 elk, 18,329 mule deer, and 19,828 white-tailed deer. Elk harvest was down 11% from 2022, while, as predicted, mule deer harvest also dropped a whopping 22% statewide. Whitetails represented the sole tick in the upward direction, accounting for a 3% increase from last year. Now, it didn't take a whole lot of rubbing the crystal ball to forecast a less than stellar mule deer harvest in 2023 because of the severe winter that preceded it. A total of 74,503 mule deer hunters hunted in fall of 2023, with nearly 25% of those successfully packing out a mule deer. Last year's roughly 22% decrease in total mule deer harvest is also the 7th consecutive year below the 10-year average. While it may seem impossible to have 70% of the years below the 10-year average, it's a reflection of unusually large mule deer harvests in 2015 and 2016, with both years over 37,000 deer harvested that eventually spiked the 10-year average. And as for elk, it was a good run. Last year would have been the 10th year in a row for elk harvest to eclipse the 20,000 mark, but that was not how last fall played out. Elk hunters took home 18,568 elk in 2023, roughly an 11% drop in animals harvested compared to 2022. Roughly 87,864 elk hunters, less than 1% fewer than 2022, took to the mountains in 2023 in search of elk, with 21% of those individuals successfully harvesting an elk. That drop was unexpected, but within normal fluctuations in annual elk harvests, and probably doesn't reflect a drop in the elk population. Chances are good we will see that bounce back up above 20,000, but that depends on how many hunters go after elk and what weather conditions they experience. White-tailed deer harvest has been at the top of bad news headlines in recent years due to disease outbreaks. However, in 2023, whitetail harvest showed a slight bump in the right direction from 19,182 in 2022 to 19,828 in 2023, which hopefully reflects recovering whitetail herds. Last fall's whitetail harvest also eclipsed the mule deer harvest for only the sixth time since 1975, when Fish and Game began tracking deer harvest by species. Now, for the full 2023 deer and elk harvest stats, go check out our summary, which is available on our website, and link in the description as well. Now, let's take a deeper look at elk. The most notable statistic from the 2023 elk season: 18,568 total elk harvested, which is down 11% from the previous year, and marks the first time since 2013 the statewide harvest dropped below 20,000. Overall, hunter numbers were practically identical to the previous year's hunter effort. Additionally, general season hunter success was right in line with previous years, which is 17%, while controlled hunt success dropped substantially from an average of 41% over the previous 5 years, down to 23% last year. Elk populations do tend to swing less dramatically than deer, and elk numbers have been relatively consistent in past years. So, what might have caused this decline? It's difficult to prove exactly what caused the drop, but Toby Bedreau believes seasonal elk distribution during hunting season may have contributed.
We had a lot of elk stay in their high country summer ranges longer than usual, and that made them less accessible to hunters, especially hunters with controlled hunt tags limited to a specific area. If the elk aren't there, hunters are not going to find them.
Hunters will see similar, if not better, elk conditions this fall. Harvest should be at or above the 10-year average, which continues to be at a near record number. While that's all good news, hunters are reminded that elk are highly nomadic, and there are no guarantees they will be in the same places they were in the past. Hunters need to be diligent at finding areas where elk want to be, and not dwell in areas without fresh sign of elk in the area. Okay, moving on to mule deer. Idaho mule deer hunting should improve after hunters last fall saw the unfortunate results of the catastrophic 2022-2023 winter, particularly in eastern Idaho. Last year's mule deer harvest dropped 22% statewide compared with the previous year, but wildlife managers expect to see it start ticking back up thanks to a mild winter and excellent 77% average fawn survival statewide. More on that to come. This brings us to 2024 and the proverbial question of whether the glass will be half empty or half full. It's largely a matter of perspective. Hunters won't see the big mule deer herds they saw a few years back, but hopefully they will see more deer than last fall.
I think we're clawing our way out of the hole. Unless we see another hard winter, we should be out of the lag period by next spring and see heavier fawns that are better able to survive.
However, it takes more than one mild winter to really boost mule deer herds. and there's an echo effect that lingers after a hard winter. Mule deer does that are heavily stressed by winter typically bear lighter than average fawns the following spring, which survive at lower rates than heavier fawns. That phenomenon was reflected by fawn survival being lower in eastern Idaho than it was in west and central Idaho. While hunter harvest is one way of quote-unquote keeping score on the health of mule deer herds, it can be an unreliable measuring stick because when herds are large and healthy, Fish and Game can offer more antlerless tags. Those antlerless tags are cut back or not reinstated after hard winters to allow herds to rebound as quickly as possible. Dropping those antlerless tags also drops the statewide mule deer harvest because antlerless hunts tend to have higher success rates, which leads us to buck hunting. With most of the state's hunters focus on bucks, last year's healthy fawn crop that survived winter means more young antlered bucks that will be sporting spikes, forked horn antlers, and a small percentage will be 3-points. Those young bucks represent a large portion of the annual buck harvest, so it's likely hunters will see an uptick in the fall harvest. As for older bucks, that will likely be a mixed bag. Fawns killed during the 2022 through 2023 winter obviously aren't coming back, so that void in the buck population will remain for several years. But that's not to say there won't be any mature bucks, just likely fewer than after years of back-to-back normal or mild winters. Buck survival through winter and hunting seasons can vary considerably depending on where you are in the state. So hunters can still find mature bucks, but not likely in the numbers they saw prior to the 2022 through 2023 winter. Overall, mule deer hunters have some reason for optimism, especially in the west and central parts of the state. They will hopefully see a few more mule deer in eastern Idaho, but it may take longer to rebuild herds there. Last but not least, let's focus on whitetails. White-tailed deer represented the biggest quote-unquote win from the 2023 hunting season, as noted by the upswing in harvest numbers for the first time since 2019. An estimated 49,098 white-tailed deer hunters hit the woods last year, with 40% of those successfully bagging a deer. As predicted, heading into the 2023 hunting season, overall harvest numbers for whitetails increased from 19,182 to 19,828. Now, recall back in 2021, EHD wreaked havoc on the Clearwater region's whitetails, killing an estimated 6,000 to 10,000 deer that year. Like any species, it takes time for animals to rebound. Prior to the 2023 hunting season, Boudreaux forecasted another 2 to 3 years before the Clearwater region's whitetail herds would be fully recovered, but optimistically pointed out that they were in fact quote-unquote over the hump.
I like where we're at this year with whitetails, and while not fully recovered, I am hopeful hunters will see more of them in the Clearwater region and similar numbers in the Panhandle and elsewhere.
Fish and Game wildlife staff will continue to monitor the EHD and CWD situation among deer populations during the remainder of summer and into fall. And deer hunters in the Panhandle need to be informed about what's happening with their latest CWD detection and how that could affect the fall hunts. Now, speaking of CWD.
The CWD Report.
Hunters, let's talk about some things you need to know about chronic wasting disease for 2024. Hunters play a critical role in testing for CWD, since there is no live test for the disease and getting accurate and current information requires annual testing. CWD is more manageable and spreads slower when only a small fraction, less than 2% of the herd is infected. The CWD situation is changing and management is evolving. The disease was detected in a mule deer buck last fall in Unit 23 near New Meadows, and again in a white-tailed doe found dead in July in Unit 1 near Bonner's Ferry up in the Panhandle. Fish and Game has the following CWD rules for the 2024 hunting season. Unit 18 was added to Unit 14 in the CWD management zone, and Unit 15 was removed after extensive testing found no animals with CWD there. People hunting in the CWD management zone must abide by special hunting rules, including mandatory CWD testing for all harvested deer, and whole carcasses can't be transported outside of Units 14 and 18. For details on special rules, head on over to our CWD webpage, link in the description. New for 2024, CWD testing is also mandatory in Units 23, 24, and 32A for deer, but carcass transport rules do not apply. Mandatory CWD testing no longer applies to elk and moose, which are less susceptible to CWD than deer. However, Fish and Game will still accept voluntary samples from hunter-harvested deer, elk, and moose anywhere in the state. In an effort to prevent the further spread of CWD and to manage populations with CWD, Fish and Game has developed a strategic plan to guide the state's response and management actions when animals test positive in an area. Hunters can take heads or lymph nodes of harvested deer, elk, and moose to any regional Fish and Game office for CWD testing, or get directions on the Fish and Game website on how to collect and submit samples themselves. We'll also have numerous sites located around the state where hunters can deposit heads or lymph nodes from harvested animals to be tested, and they can also request a sample kit from Fish and Game's website. Drop-off locations can be viewed on Fish and Game's website at idfg.idaho.gov/CWD/sampling/locations. I'll also include a link for that in the description. All right, a couple last things to note as we wrap up this episode. Hunters, you hear us talking about mandatory hunter reports every single year. Whether you harvested an animal or not, you are reminded to fill out your report 10 days after harvest for deer, elk, and pronghorn only. 10 days after the closing date of your season for each tag purchased. Mandatory hunter reports only take a brief moment of your time, and it's incredibly helpful. That's critical hunt and harvest information that our wildlife managers need to maximize and sustain healthy herds. You can help us collect this vital information, which helps conserve your hunting, fishing, and trapping dollars. For more information, go check out our Mandatory Hunter Report webpage, link in the description. And lastly, a reminder to all big game hunters that season setting for 2025 and 26 will begin this winter with the Commission approving changes in March. Hunters, keep an eye out for upcoming season proposals, open houses, and opportunities to comment on proposed changes, all of which will be found on our website. Hey, whether you're tuning in from the office or during the long drive out to hunting camp, best of luck out there this fall season. All of this information can also be accessed on our website. Just search for 2024 Deer and Elk Hunting Outlook. The online version is going to have a lot more numbers to look at, and it also features regional outlooks from real boots-on-the-ground information from our regional wildlife managers. So head on over to our website or hit the Deer and Elk Hunting Outlook link in the description if you're still hungry for more information. Thanks for putting an ear to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin. If there's something on your mind or if you got a question related to fish and game matters, feel free to drop us a line at podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Again, that's podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll catch you next week.